Alright, hi everybody. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about community ecology, and if you're following along in your reading guides, this would be in chapter 53's information. So we've talked a little bit about how we organize some of the structure within ecosystems, and we can look at single organisms, move that up to larger populations, and then what we're on to today are community structures. So we start with this picture of some lions having lunch, and we really start to see in communities how different populations interact. And that's one of the major principles that follow community ecology. So we look at all the organisms that live in a particular place, and we try to answer the question, how do they interact? And that is the study of community ecology. So one of the first things that we have to understand is a niche. Now, if you watch much PBS and some of the documentaries that are done in England, they call it a niche, so that's another way of saying it. However, I've heard it referred to as niche here in the United States. Basically what it says is this is an organism's ecological role. So that really didn't get much further along in the definition. So I like to give this analogy. If your habitat is your address, then the niche is the job that you do at that address. So for example, the habitat would be like Twinsburg High School. And within the high school, the niche, we have different jobs. We have a principal's job, we have a secretary's job, we have a guidance counselor's job, we have a teacher's job, we have cafeteria and janitorial staff, and we have the students. Each one of those jobs has a different role within that address. So they always give the classic example of these barnacles. And what they found, there's two different species of barnacles. There's one barnacle that's a little bit larger that tends to be able to live anywhere below low tide. And then there's another species of barnacle that tends to live at high tide. And we've got these kind of different roles within the niches that we call, like the fundamental niche versus the realized niche. The fundamental niche says that they could possibly go in any of those locations, but the realized is where they actually exist, mostly due to competition. And so we have a principle with that. We call it the competitive exclusion principle. If we would remove species 2, then species 1 would occupy the whole tidal zone. But at lower depths, species 2 outcompetes species 1, excluding it from its potential or fundamental niche. And we have a principle with this, we call it the competitive exclusion principle. And what that says is no two similar species can occupy the same niche at the same time. So if you look at the difference between lions and tigers and bears, oh my, you find that lions and tigers really do have some of the same behaviors, some of the same food requirements. However, they're not living together. They are in some cases even in separate continents, depending on the species of lion and the species of tiger. And that's what our competitive exclusion principle teaches us. No two similar species can occupy the same niche at the same time. And it's not just mammals that we see this in. There's some very interesting studies done in the rainforest ecosystems with some of these lizards. We've got the same genus of lizards, and within the species then, as we get a little bit more specific, they occupy different levels of the forest. Some only live in branches. Some only live where they can be on a sunny surface. Some live right on the ground. Some live on the bark. And what this tells us is as we start looking at all these different species that can exist in this one little location, talks about these must have competed at some point, or they must have adaptations that lead them to be more fit in these different locations. So it talks us, it teaches us some of the principles that we'll talk about in evolution also. Okay, so now if we get into some other types of interactions that species can have. We call this symbiotic interactions. Sym meaning together, bio meaning living, so how do you live together? You could live together and compete. We've got predation and parasitism as one, mutualism and commensalism. And I've got these little symbols beside each one of these phrases. Minuses mean that it's a negative. Pluses means it's a positive, and the zero means that there really is no positive or negative associated with it. So I'm sure you've heard about parasitic wasps, auks and the birds, barnacles, lichen, and I'll give you an example to have for each one of these. So if we look at the first one, clownfish and sea anemones, and if you have ever watched Finding Nemo, you know what a clownfish looks like. This is actually a case of mutualism, so both species get a benefit here. The clownfish, they've got a nice little protective place to stay because they're actually immune from the sea anemone's spines and stings. So they've got a nice hiding spot, good location. So they get protection out of the deal. Well, what's the sea anemone get? Well, the sea anemone is going to have lots of nutrients flowing probably from fecal matter from these fish, and it's also going to be able to get any bits and pieces of prey that's left behind. So the food source is being brought to it by the clownfish, and it doesn't have to worry about a short supply of food. So both species have a benefit here. Commensalism, the one I want to show you for this, is just some moss on a tree, on tree bark. The moss gets a perfect location. The grooves in the tree bark help to hold in moisture. The tree, however, doesn't really get a benefit from this, and at the same time, though, it's not harmed either. So a commensalism relationship, one species gets a benefit while the other is not harmed, and it also does not get a benefit. All right, the human botfly. I know this was a subject on a couple house episodes that students have asked me before. Human botflies exist in tropical locations, and the adult will actually lay an egg under the surface of the skin. You can see the little hole there. And then as that larva develops, because it's in such a nice, warm, nutrition-rich environment, it can grow very large, as you see that picture down there at the bottom. So it is considered a parasite, and parasitism is an example of symbiosis. The parasite, it gets all the nutrients that it needs and all the places that it might need to live, and unfortunately the host organism probably is losing nutrition. Now, something that you want to keep in mind is a parasite's goal is not to kill its host. It just wants to feed off of you. So it doesn't want to impair you mentally. It doesn't want to impair you physically. It doesn't want to impair you from eating because it's dependent upon you. Parasitism is very different than predation. And that's our next one. Even though we're looking at the same symbols for predation, a parasite, if it would kill you, it loses its host and its food source. Predation, on the other hand, operates under the assumption that the predator can eat multiple things. So obviously the predator gets its food source, and the poor little ox here that is going to become lunch probably will no longer be living. Now the last one that I want to talk about, and this may not have been a part of what you learned in Honors Bio, is competition. And this is a little different because actually in competition, it's usually species specific, so it's within the same species. But both of those individuals who are competing lose out. And so unfortunately, a lot of energy, a lot of time is going into, competing with the other organism, and so you might be wasting energy, you might have to eat more, you might, quite honestly not be as alert and get eaten by a predator. So both of them do not benefit in that type of symbiosis. All right, well, that's where I want to end today with community interactions. And in class, we're going to look at a little bit of the connection of a predator and evolution. And that's the part that I want to go with. We'll talk about some camouflage issues. We're also going to look at this idea of a niche using goldenrod, so we'll be going outside for that. All right, please write down any questions that you have, and I will see you in class.